using the foot bar to help block movement or help support movement and also offer students security and stabilization when learning movement is something we're going to continue working on in this segment. So we finished our last segment with standing using the foot bar on the pelvis. I want to talk a little deeper about that. To review, we did go over side standing exercises, side sitting, forward sitting, and ended up with pelvic stabilization during flexion. When we're teaching pelvic flexion, hip flexion or lumbar flexion, we want to find ways to get feedback to the students what's happening at the hips. So when I'm here and I want to teach hip flexion, I can have them feel the pressure of the hip bones, the front hip bones, come down around the foot bar. When I'm doing lumbar flexion, there's no change and no movement. So it starts to give the students a sense of what's happening at the pelvis when they can start saying, okay, when I hip flex, I can feel the position on the foot bar and the pressure change. And when I'm teaching lumbar flexion, I can get a sense of how nothing is happening, nothing is changing. So it's a wonderful way not only to stabilize the pelvis, but also give a kinesthetic tactile feedback using the foot bar for what's happening down in the pelvis area and teach the difference between the two. Now, with the foot bar gone, as an example of what we tend to see happen, we tend to have people move forward. They will collapse. They'll lock the knees. So giving them that foot bar is going to give them that necessary feedback to understand what's going on at the hips. This also is going to allow them during rotational exercises. So let me show you using an example. When I'm standing aside the carriage and I'm doing a rotational exercise, I see so much of this, so much movement in the hips. Once I've taught them that pelvic stability, I can have them go into this nose springs version of torso rotation. But if they first don't have the setup of pelvic stability, that might be a challenge for them. They may not be able to understand what you're talking about. And then in a group class, you're running from student to student trying to stabilize their pelvis. So this will also help them get that sense of what's going on. So when using the foot bar to block the hips and the anterior, and you're going to teach some rotation. I'm going to take this down to nose springs. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to put both my hands on it. And I'm going to get myself to where I'm not in an uncomfortable spot. So I'm at the hip bone's right here. So I'm at my hip crease. And I'm going to just go into a nice hip flexion. I'm just going to hold onto the box and I'm going to rotate. And then switch hands and rotate. So I've got two things working with me. Stabilization of the pelvis and understanding where the upper body is closing the chain during movement versus thread the needle open chain. So this is, if you've watched the videos on open and closed chain movement, you'll understand finding ways to close the chain, which is a stable environment for the body to learn from, is going to be very, very helpful. Even if you're not going to go to the standing rotation that I just showed you aside the carriage, you just want to get some wonderful stretches using the foot bar to teach rotation and movement. I can do lumbar flexion and rotation. I can do hip flexion and rotation. Again, I went through that really, really quick. but understanding there's different ways you can use no springs, the box. You don't even need to use the box. You can take the box off if you want to get a little bit deeper movement. Hip flexion, lumbar flexion, extension to come up, lumbar flexion to go down, hip flexion to go down, lumbar flexion to come up. This also blocks the pelvis from our pubic bone tuckers. It's helpful. If they shove their hips forward, it's going to hit the nerves and be uncomfortable. So let me show you rotation, hip flexion, rotation. So there's some wonderful opportunities to learn from certain exercises, how to stabilize, how to teach movement without springs, taking it up a notch by taking the hand away, the stable hand. Putting the box back on. Now, if you have students who say, hey man, that's killing me right there, use the chair pad or some kind of pad. Let me grab the chair pad. You can put the chair pad right on the bar. I do that for any of my students when I'm doing spine extension on the bar, or I'm doing anything where we're in this position. So that makes it much more comfortable. It decreases a little bit of feedback, but if somebody's hypersensitive there, that'll give them enough feedback even with that extra padding. So going back to options, you can do, and I've seen this done standing in the well, which I'll show you in a moment, but you can use the front or the back of the hips for stability. So let's say I just want to do a nice little stretch, no springs. You can add springs on if you're going to do, more work. You can add a rotational aspect, arm up, rotate. Now, for me, there's not a lot of movement in rotation. And I will tell you, most people, when they do thread the needle kneeling and they do this, they're all over in the pelvis. So this also lets our students feel whether they're truly rotating because the pelvis can't move. Try that. You can experience it with a hand, forearms on. You can do it up here, rotate, and just make sure you only go as far as you have that rotation available so you're not moving the hips. As I mentioned, you can block from the back or from the front. Here is from the front, using the bar to help assist feedback while leaning against it. Adjusting your foot bar, making sure your limbs are right for this movement, hip flexion. And I can really feel when I flex my hips, I can feel my sit bones roll over the top of the bar. So that's another great feedback. And if I'm doing lumbar flexion, I don't feel my sit bones move at all. So they stay like under the foot bar. I did a segment using a ball against it to start facilitating understanding of movement. But that might be something that, you use whatever tools you have available. Some students might like stable pelvis against the bar. Some people might like to put a ball here, foam roller heel, and get that movement. So you might want to take that video if you've seen it. And if you're not sure what I'm talking about, you can, in the search engine, just search for foam roller or stability ball. And I even showed you with the sticky ball how to teach pelvic movement. It was a tutorial on lumbar flexion from the pelvis. So if you want to do certain exercises and build a class around that, and using these tutorials on finding ways to stabilize the body using the foot bar for exercises, you can do a whole class on that. You can take all 4 of the series, the 20-minute, and make a full class. It depends on how you want to teach, or you can just take segments out. So going back to teaching lumbar flex or hip flexion, I can feel the sit bones roll over the top. Lumbar flexion, I can keep those sit bones anchored under that foot bar against it. I can add rotation, up, hip flexion, and rotation. I can adjust where my hand is on the bar. I can add more of a press. That anytime you're adding more extreme ranges of motion in the thorax and the ribs, whether it's extension, flexion, rotation, lateral flexion, finding ways to assist with pelvic stability is a game changer for students learning, and the curve that they have for understanding, or the learning curve to understanding movement. Using the foot bar, if you're going to do any more leaning and you're going to do carriage work, I would always recommend starting without the box. Get yourself leaned in and just have them move in and out. So I'm doing the ball of the foot and I'm getting a nice controlled movement there and up. I can grab the bar and I can stretch this way and then back and then out. Now, if I want to add a spring, I would probably choose a yellow spring. Lean against it. Adjust your leg. So because the yellow spring is behind me, I've got it at the calf. But if I'm going to switch sides, the yellow spring is going to be in front of me, so it's going to be there. So it doesn't really matter where your yellow spring is. A lot of the times I've got it set, I've got my yellow spring on the side so I can use some stuff for standing in the well. So leaning against it, just getting some simple leg presses is a wonderful way to get the hip massage, get some stability in there. You can add, stretch up. So it's like a mermaid series. And again, totally supported by that foot bar. I can add a little bit more extreme, keeping the leg straight as I bend that way, bending the knee this way. And I encourage you to try both, see what you like. Each movement is just slightly different enough. You can add a rotational aspect if you want. So careful of the flexion to get the hand on the foot bar, find that rotation. I'm going to put my other hand back and I'm going to see how much rotation I can get. And the great thing is I'm moving in the ribs. I'm going to move the foot just slightly forward. So I'm really supported here. So my pelvis isn't moving. I've got that feedback there, and I'm getting such an amazing stretch through my, I would say I can feel a little psoas if I add more extension, but it's mostly my internal obliques. And a lot of the times when we're doing rotation, this is really tight. So it's hard to actually talk. When I'm doing rotation, I don't get these wonderful ranges because the pelvis is moving. So rotate. I'm going to actually take my right hand to the far bar and palm face forward. That's going to help me a little bit. Get yourself set. So there's some great opportunities to find Pilates via Twister, if you know that game I'm talking about. I'll show you the hand position facing away. So here is, and again, I want to get to that side hip to where it's not uncomfortable. Side bend, stretch, straight leg. Mermaid, straight leg. Side bend, stretch, bent on both. Adding some leg stretches, adding rotation. I'm going to bring the foot forward for that one. Underhand. This is my scully side, so I'm not going to be able to get there. The rotation. And again, with me on this side, I'm going to have to come forward and rotate because of my scoliosis, so it doesn't jam me. So that's a wonderful way to try some different intense stabilization, pelvic rotation, and lateral flexion exercises using the foot bar to block the pelvis. You can use a foot bar to block it from the front, from the side outside, from the back. You can also block it from the front while going here. So I'm going to put my body here. Now I'm going to show you, I've done it here where I'm really lean forward and I just do leg presses here, do some ankle plantar flexion, switch legs, do some presses here. I've added the box as well. Arm, bend, arm. With your reformer, you're going to have to try different body positioning. Let me show you with the box on. This is all being demoed with a yellow. You can adjust that according. I'm going to take my foot, put it up, take my body forward, and do nice core control, nice pelvic stability. There's no strain on my lower back. I can do, if I want to add, for this one, I would take my socks off, but I'm not gonna do that today, but I can do frog, alternating leg presses, all pelvic stable. Just going through a few different things, adding more extension, arms back. This is the one where I would definitely put my feet on more of a stable surface because I'm slipping in my socks. So there's some wonderful ways to use the foot bar. Outside, we had started with side hip lateral flexion in the first segment. So be aware that the pelvis is a great way to, using the foot bar at the pelvis is a great way to teach what's going on at the hips. And the last but not least, so we went over this, I want to go over just a little bit of arm presses. So my shoulders are pretty tight. This also helps me. It's very difficult to hyperextend in the lower back when you're doing shoulder extension in this position. Not a great range of motion, but if you have the lower bar, you can take your legs out. You can add a little bit of choreography with it. You can add, if you have students with good shoulder range of motion, you can add extension of the thoracic and then back in. Take your arms forward. If you want to do a full series, up, arms back. You can do this probably with a yellow spring is the most appropriate. When you're in this range of motion for shoulder extension, don't be concerned that the carriage doesn't move that far. This is a pretty extreme range. Please make sure that you feel comfortable in the sacrum, padded if you need it. You can add a little bit of rotation here. As I mentioned, hand position can go less aggressive, medium, and more. I can add rotation from any of the three hand position. And the great thing is my pelvis is stable. I'll show you on this side. So it's important to try all the different hand positioning, pelvic positioning when you're doing things on the floor, movement on the floor, whether you're in front, standing side, facing, or back, or in the well with or without springs. We're going to take it up a notch and start working on some standing exercises. Because I'm on the 18-inch clinical, we're going to start the next segment with the box on the ground and go over some front, side, back, sitting, different variations. If you have any questions or comments, always leave them below the video in the comment section. If it's a question that you're really not sure you want to ask in front of all the other subscribers, send me a private email and then I can address it in a future video. Your comments are invaluable to me and they help me kind of take segments and understand what you guys want. This was a request from a student wanting to know different ways to teach pelvic stability, and that got me to thinking about how I use the Footbar to teach pelvic stability. So let's end this one here. We're going to start the next one standing on the box and go a little deeper in some standing exercises that are going to give students more confidence to move without feeling too unstable. Thanks for watching.